Danny Nemu.
Danny Nemu. Sorry.
Yeah, it's Danny Nemu to rhyme not with Danny LaRue.
No, exactly.
Drugs in the Bible. If you were to ask her, are there any drugs in the Bible? Do you know what she'd say?
No.
None! I am the Reverend Danny Nemu. I was ordained on the internet for $15 in about 2001. So this is proper legit. I am also a Bible fiend. So if there are any drug fiends in the audience, patience, we'll get there. But first I want to talk a little bit about this very psychedelic book, the Bible. Do we have any Hebrew readers in the audience? Yes, can you read that for me, please? Very, very good, thank you. There it is again, and that is normally translated as, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. I'm actually going to take this. Okay. In the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. Right, so Hebrew, that's it with the vowels. The vowel points didn't go in until about the 10th century AD. Before that, Hebrew was written without any vowel points. And there are many ways to pronounce a word in Hebrew, and when it's written without the vowel points, which was for most of the history of the Bible. And it can mean very different things, in the same way that, for example, hat means something different to hot, and my hat is hot and my hattie is a hottie, all mean different things. When you change the vowel points in a Hebrew word, the meaning changes. So that's one thing to know about Hebrew. Something else is that, so this is the Ramban, Nachmanides. In the 13th century AD, he said that the Bible was originally written in black fire on white fire, and it was written without any spaces. And if we look at an inscription in Paleo-Hebrew from about the same time that the Bible was probably written down, we can see that it doesn't actually have any spaces, so there might be something in what he said. And the Ramban said that if you divide up the words differently, it reveals different secrets. And he gave an example of how this might be done. So let's squish them all together, separate them out again, and I wonder if my Hebrew speaker can read those first three. Fantastic, thank you very much. And do you know how you might translate that into English?
In the head, Yitpara would be created God.
Very good, okay. Thank you very much. So the Hebrew, that was really good. The Hebrew verbs work a little bit different, particularly ancient Hebrew, work a bit different to English. Barosh means in the head, which is interesting. And that yitbara becomes passive, so was created. And it can also be are being created, and it can also be will be created, because, as I said, verbs are either imperfect or perfect. And then Elohim, now this might be a bit controversial, that's a very interesting word, Elohim. It's both singular and plural, and feminine and singular, and abstract and concrete. So it could be translated as in the head are created powers or drives or gods. And that's a very interesting way to start a book, which, actually I'll just keep that on for a minute, which has a whole lot of experiences in it of things like someone seeing an angel, which other people don't see, or someone seeing writing on the wall, which other people don't see, and compulsions, and the kind of stuff we might think of as psychiatric experience, or mystical experience, but certainly stuff that may be considered to be happening in the head. So that's an interesting way to start a book. And then you can do some similar word magic with the rest of the sentence. Maybe you can do this one again. So how would you translate that?
You are the sky and you are the earth.
Right, now that is a really nice way to translate a book. Now I don't have very much time today, and a lot of this stuff, like the kind of linguistic stuff, it's all in a book, which I'm going to show you later, and also how Greek works and how our minds work differently in different languages and all that kind of stuff. But to move on with this, you are heavens and you are earth. I remember once upon a time I was lying beneath an apple tree on mushrooms. And I could feel how the leaves were trafficking their phytochemicals and their gases and their liquids with the sky, and I could feel how the roots were going down to the earth and how the earth was coming up into the roots, and I could also feel my own body merging into different aspects of this process. And when you break up the world in different ways, it reveals different secrets. Much like when you break up the words of the Bible in different ways, it reveals different secrets. And this is one of the wonderful things which psychedelics can do for us. Make the edges a bit porous, so when we look round, it's like, oh, I see. So this is, it's also one of the reasons they're so good for therapy and for us reconsidering our situation, because, you might think, my wife's a nightmare, and then you take a big dose and think, actually, maybe we're the nightmare, maybe the edge of this thing is somewhere else, and then maybe we can do something about it. So thank you for listening to that on the Bible. Let's talk about drugs. So frankincense and myrrh. This is frankincense. It comes from the Boswellia sacra tree, which is a long way from Palestine. It's a 6-month, 1,500-mile trek through robber-infested deserts to get a posh smell all the way over there, which seems a bit far-fetched. It was before it was burnt to Yahweh in the Israelite territories. It was burnt to Baal in Canaan. It was burnt to Baal in Babylon by the ton. It was burnt to Ra'ah in Egypt as well. This trade has been going for 6,000 years. The frankincense trade built the city of Petra. In fact, it's the oldest international commodity in the world. So why did they bother? Right? I'm going to tell you all about the psychopharmacology of frankincense and some other drugs, but no one ever learned anything about drugs by listening to me talk about them. So the way you learn about drugs is by eating them. So I have bought some for you. Your dose is about the size of 2 garden peas. It'll get chewy. It'll chew it up. I've already had my dose, so please take some. You don't have to if you don't want to, but please take some. And then pass it this way, and... It's frankincense, yeah. I was going to say I'm not going to drug you. It is a drug. It's all right, I'll tell you about it in a minute. About the size of 2 garden peas. If you have much more than that, it might start to offend the flora in your intestinal tract. But it's very good for you. It's good for the skin, it's good for digestion, it's good for a whole load of things. But it's also a GABA receptor agonist working on the GABA system, which is the same system which Valium works on. It's the most of the cells in your brain are GABA cells, or 40% of them are. And of those 40% of the cells are also attached to, basically every neuron in your brain is either a GABAergic cell or attached to a GABAergic cell. So it's an inhibitory system. It means it kind of chills you out, like Valium does, for example. It also works on the dopamine system, which is what a whole load of different drugs work on. So get in. It's an anxiolytic, it means it reduces anxiety, antidepressant. I would like us to get away from these clinical terms which originate in the poorhouses and lunatic asylums of history. It is wonderful. Frankincense and a lot of the drugs we're going to be talking about today are used for attaining a state of prophecy, connecting with the gods. And it's absolutely lovely. It also works on the TRPV3 ion channel. This is a bit complicated. This particular ion channel is involved in aura, which is what happens before an epileptic fit. It's what happens before a migraine, and it's the sense of presences. It's the terror, it's the fear, it's the déjà vu, it's the jamais vu. Lights moving around, spirits coming, like some people know they're about to have an epileptic fit because their granny comes and visits them before they have it. So you can see connections with prophetic state and this kind of mystical state. I was going to write to these guys because I've discovered some more stuff about TRPV3 ion channels in the Bible, but these guys have already patented incense or acetate uses and run dodgy pharma companies, so I'm keeping it to myself. Right, well, we tend to... Oh, by the way, this frankincense is brought to you by the frankincense store. And back in... So, modern pharmacology tends to be focused on isolating what we call active ingredients and then administering them. But back in the day, the science of pharmacology was a different affair, and they were much more interested in combining different herbs to see what they can do, and I would say a much more nuanced affair. So let's talk about one of the very famous synergies, which is frankincense and myrrh. In fact, let's talk about myrrh first. It comes from the commiphora plant. It contains various opioid receptor agonists. Those are three. That middle one, they're sesquiterpenoids. That means they work on the opioid system, the same as heroin and opium and saffron and other pleasant things. So that middle one there has a tenth the power, the pain-killing power of morphine. So we're talking about quite powerful chemicals here. For reasons that I'm going to explain, they're not that powerful when orally. No, that's not true. They are quite powerful when orally taken. So here's some other ones. If anyone knows anything about cannabis psychopharmacology, you might recognise some of those chemicals from cannabis. Limonene is an interesting one. It's antidepressant. So here's a couple of them. Safrole, eugenol, and L-mesine. They're all in myrrh, and they are structurally very similar to MDMA and to mescaline, which is rather interesting, isn't it? Remember that one L-mesine, because we're going to talk about that in a minute. Myrrh in Hebrew is nataf, which means prophecy. And if we think about what prophecy is, it's the kind of distillate of a really good idea, something to be expressed. I mean, something really condensed. In this kind of context, it was prophets looking what was going on and kind of producing some important information. It also means to distill, and they are these kind of tears that come off the plant. So I guess what I'm getting at here is that the way Hebrew works is a fascinating poetic language where something can mean quite different things which actually have a kind of underlying connection. So on to synergies. If you mix frankincense and myrrh together, leave them overnight, then something extraordinary happens, and it produces a whole load of extra chemicals in the mix. A lot of those working on the opioid system as well, so it becomes a more powerful drug. And also it has extra powers against cancer as well. Now this has been known by Bedouin shaman priests for thousands and thousands of years, these kind of synergistic connections. We're going to talk about some more here with the anointing oil. Where is my Hebrew speaker? Can you read that for me, please?
Shemen ha-mishcha.
Very nice. Okay, so shemen means oil. Mishcha comes from the word masha, which is where we get the word massage from. It means to wipe or to paint. So that is a bad image of how you use the anointing oil. So it was used as a massage, it seems. In fact, in local medicine, in Egyptian medicine, in Persian medicine, in all these medicines, there was a lot of oils being massaged into people's bodies. Mashah or mishcha, so it means the anointed one, and it's where we get the word Mashiach, which means Messiah, when it's translated into our languages. And the Messiah back in the day wasn't that unhappy looking dude pinned to the wall in churches. He was the anointed king who was set to do great things, and this is what he was anointed with. Myrrh, kaneh, cassia, cinnamon, and olive oil. Cassia and cinnamon we'll get onto in a minute. We've already talked about myrrh. And this is what happens. It's used specifically on a king to introduce him to Yahweh. Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brethren, and the Spirit of Yahweh came upon David strongly from that day forward. It's also used on the priests, because the priests also have to minister. They have to be the connection between Yahweh, the tribal god, and the people, as did the king. The king was expected to do the will of the tribal god. So we're talking about myrrh. Here's your dose of myrrh, slightly smaller this time, maybe about the size of one garden pea. So go ahead, you can pass it on to me, please. Thank you. So kaneh, translated as calamus. Calamus is a reed grass. It's a terrible translation. Kaneh is used to make clothes, so it's not a reed grass. Clothes, it would melt in a couple of days. This is in the Talmud, old book of Jewish tradition, let's say, and it's translated as hemp. In the singular, it is kanbos, or kanebos, right? It's a familiar word. Kaneh means fragrant cane. I used to be fond of a fragrant caning myself. This word kanbos, it sounds very much like cannabis, and Herodotus visits the Scythians in the 5th century BC, and he says that the Scythians take some of this hemp seed, he calls it cannabis, and creeping under their felt coverings, throw it upon red-hot stones. Immediately it smokes and gives out such a vapour as no Grecian vapour bath can exceed. The Scyths, delighted, shout for joy. Looks like fun, doesn't it? These are some vessels from Scythia which were found with residues of cannabis and opium in them. So the Scythians had cannabis, and to cut a long story short, everybody had cannabis. They all called it cannabis. We have archaeological evidence in Egypt on Ramses II's mummy of pollen, and of course this territory was an important trade route on the way to Egypt. We also have archaeological evidence from the southern part of Judah from about the 8th century BC, if I remember correctly. It's a garrison, so it was a military temple, and you have 2 altars. And in fact, those stones, they had 2 stones in them as well. And it appears that Yahweh was worshipped along with his wife, Asherah, because you go 30 kilometers down the road and there's actually inscriptions to Yahweh and his wife. So it looks like, not unlike me, Yahweh also split up with his wife. Asherah was worshipped with cannabis, Yahweh worshipped with frankincense. Now the synergy of these two is amazing because they both work on the dopamine system on either side of the synapse, right? Frankincense inhibits uptake of dopamine, so that means there's tons more dopamine in the cleft, and cannabis increases the amount of dopamine that goes into the synaptic cleft. So basically they make certain neurons fire in the dopaminergic system more often. Dopamine is involved in language production and coming up with new ideas, and also pleasure. This is interesting because this room at the back is called the dabir, right? Dabar in Hebrew means word or paragraph or sentence or speech or argument. And the yod, the extra letter there, is what you see in Hebrew words when Yahweh, when the God comes down. So that chamber could be described as the site of the word of God or something like that. And what happens in there, well, the priest goes in there, goes into a cloud of psychoactive incense, and then comes out with words and ideas. This is what psychoactives, or these chemicals, were used for back in the day. They were used for divination. They were used to answer problems, right? So this is a very good problem-solving technique for any of you to try. Go into your bathroom, or your bath, lie down in the bath, burn some frankincense, and just see what comes into your mind. Fantastic. And so, you can do what you like. Well, you can't, if you do this stuff wrong, you're liable to the death penalty according to the Bible. So that's myrrh and cannabis. Let's talk about cinnamon and cassia. I hope you're keeping up with the pharmacology. It's not that complicated, but I just don't have much time. So this is the CYP3A4 enzyme, right? The cytochrome system is a system of enzymes which break down, everything in your body, but everything you consume. But 5 of them break down all of the drugs you're likely to encounter as a human being, or 99% of the drugs you're likely to encounter. So I'm going to tell you about one of them, CYP3A4. And it breaks down, metabolizes L-mesine, which is one we saw before. That was a bit like mescaline. When you take this on its own, without inhibiting that enzyme, it's a mild sedative. When you take it with that enzyme inhibited, it becomes like mescaline. I don't know if any of you are familiar with how ayahuasca works, but it has DMT in it, which is a powerful psychoactive. It also has, it's a mix of 2 plants. This is a simplified story, there's more to it than this, but the enzyme inhibitor in the vine inhibits your enzyme so the DMT can get to your brain, and so can the gods. So L-mesine is inhibited by that one. Now, cinnamon, which is Cinnamomum cassia, Cinnamomum verum, inhibits 4 of the 5 enzymes which break down drugs which you might encounter in your life. And the other one is inhibited by cassia. Can you put some cassia in the thing, please? So these 2 together, to kind of cut a long story short, they knock out your body's defense systems to drugs, and this is what happens. So things which are normally sedatives, this is from Erowid, people have tested these things out. Electric LSD-like psychedelic. Euphoria washes over me that grows in intensity by the minute. 4 falling constantly into some abyss inside myself. Sounds like fun, doesn't it? Right, so all of the priests go into the tabernacle. They are anointed with this oil. Every time they go in there, they're anointed with this oil. And then the high priest goes off into this chamber at the back we were talking about before, the Dabir. We saw a version of the Dabir. Now, this is the tabernacle, right? The tabernacle is described over 5 chapters of Exodus. So to put that in context, the Tower of Babel gets half a chapter. This is a really important bit of kit. And the how far apart the pegs were, and all of these skins over the top. That veil at the back, we know from other sources, is the thickness of a man's hand, right? So it's a chunky screen, and basically you make yourself a 4.5 meter cubed hot box at the back of the tabernacle, and nothing's getting out of there. And the only thing you take in there is finely ground handfuls of psychoactive incense. So the high priest has already been dosed up with the inhibitors and myrrh and cannabis, and then he gets all of this on top. So we had some galbanum. Bernie Galbanum works on the GABA system as well with myrrh, cassia. I haven't got time to talk about these, but if any of you are intrepid, this is Cassarea costus. It's what you put in joss sticks. Now this is a powder, and you can sniff it. So I won't pass it to you, but if you want to have a little pinch, I've already had several doses today and I'm fine. It will burn just a little bit. I think the cameraman has some as well. Yeah, okay, good. He seems all right. This one's, so I haven't got time to talk about very much. I thought I'm over already, but am I good for another minute?
Yes.
Okay. Netadini Pyrotechnica, Malash Salam in Hebrew, I might pronounce that wrong. It means that which causes smoke to rise, right? That's seen as a good thing when a sacrifice is offered, that the smoke rises straight up, like a cloud, like a pillar of smoke. Anyone familiar with the pillar of smoke from the Bible? Yeah. Right, so the Israelites, they don't really know where they're going, they're wandering around the wilderness. There's a promised land somewhere in the future. Sounds rather like a heavy acid trip. There's something promised, and the next step is what? The pillar of smoke, you can imagine, like the high priest is getting high in his hot box. When it's done, gets his ideas, opens up this thick veil, and this cloud of smoke comes through the tabernacle to the door, opens up the door, and it rises like a pillar of smoke. So perhaps when we're talking about the Israelites following a pillar of smoke, we're talking about the Israelites following the shaman priest who is following the pillar of smoke, because it's telling him what to do. What does it tell him to do? Well, where do you get water? Where should we move the camp to? When should we attack our enemies? When should we run away? All of the kind of questions that in shamanic societies, in the Amazon, for example, the same things which get asked today. Particularly that thing about war divination. The other priests, right? So they, we don't know what was in the showbread, but they have the enzyme inhibitor, then they go and eat the showbread. Now we do know about the dosage of the showbread, and the bread of presences it's called. Every priest got only the size of a bean, and the delicate priests refused to take it all together. So we're talking about some pretty potent bread. It once happened, one took his own share, and his fellows, he was nicknamed Robber till his death. So I don't know if you've got a friend called Drug Hoover Percy that picked up the name at Glastonbury or something, but this is what we're talking about. Okay, I want to talk briefly about synesthesia, which is where you see sounds, or where the senses get mixed up. This is a line from Exodus, and all the people are seeing the voices and the flames and the sound of a trumpet. Now you don't normally see voices or sounds unless you're tripping, right? It's the only example of synesthesia in the Bible. It's also the only example of a collective vision, and all the people see together. Normally in scripture, one person sees something on their own, like Arjuna sees Krishna on his own. But this time they all sit together. And this is when they're all eating manna together. So what's manna? We think of it as food aid falling out of the sky, but it's not. It's a secretion. That's what man means. It means secretion. For reasons I can't really go into, because I haven't got time, but they are in my book, it has all of the markers of ergot, which is a fungal infection which you see on kind of plants in the area. So it's a secretion like ergot. It tastes like honey, like ergot. It rots very quickly, like ergot. Moses gets cross. He says, "Don't keep it till tomorrow." And those who do keep it tomorrow, it's rotted. It's got worms. at the same time. And the way you prepare it in the Bible is you grind it, you boil it, and you bake it, which is exactly how you get LSA out of ergot. Ergot is poisonous if you just eat it on its own. If you boil it and then separate off the soluble fraction, and then you bake that, and then you grind it, the other way around, grind, boil, bake, you get crystals of LSA, which is a close cousin of LSD. It's also in Morning Glory seeds if you want to try it. I haven't got time to talk about that. But that is why I believe that the whole story of Exodus, which is the leaving behind of your conditioning, the wandering through the confusion of the wilderness and arriving at the promised land, is a story of the psychedelic experience. Now, if you want to learn more about this stuff, there are some books you can read. One of them is Exodus, another one is Psalms, or you can read mine, particularly this one, which is what we were talking about today. And here is all the other stuff I do. I'm a hypnotist, do group sessions, I work in reforestation, and thank you again to the Frankincense store. There is a discount code. If you want to get some frankincense, call up these guys and say the code Nemu. Thank you very much.
Nemu.